on a time when... Okay. To get us started, I'd like to invite each of you to share a personal anecdote on a time when you or someone you respect took a stand to break the bias. Kelly, should we start with you?
Sure, and thank you so much, and happy to be here. I've got one. It's probably got its own recency bias. It's a small thing, but something that just happened recently. So one of my customers, who is a bank, they were looking for a retail banking CIO. Really important that they find this person, global role and everything. And they actually, the recruiting manager came to the person that I know, who's the COO, and said to them, you know, hey, I found this amazing person. And he said, we're not hiring anybody until you show me a completely diverse slate. And I don't care how long the role is open, but you need to come forward with a completely diverse slate for this particular function. I just thought it was good. There are many companies like our own at Google that do that anyway. But in some of the more traditional industries, I think it's not always the case, and just really great that somebody would stand up and make sure that that happens. And I think just a learning for other people as well to sort of follow suit. So that's the one that I thought of.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, that is inspirational. And, you know, it gives me so much hope that, you know, we're making progress on a daily basis. Thank you. Erik, I'm sorry, I think I kind of cut you off. You're next. Please go.
Oh, no problem. Is my audio coming through okay?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm getting some feedback. So the story in my head on this is not a specific example. It's actually of my mother. And I grew up with a mom who is a strong Italian woman. And she demonstrated time and time again just to stand up for injustice in general. And I grew up in a house where that was just normal, that you make a stand and you say something, even when it's awkward. And I still remember as a kid finding it very awkward when she would step into a situation and call people out. But I think I grew up in that home feeling that's normal. And I'm very thankful that my mother was the kind of person that was not afraid to sometimes ruffle feathers, I would say. You know, I think her Italian came out that way. And I'm grateful that I grew up in a home like that. So my mom is the example that came to mind.
Thank you so much. And I see lots of heads bobbing. I think a lot of us would agree that our moms are, you know, inspirations. And for me personally, it's my mom and my daughter. Both of them, you know, have taught me a lot. So thank you for that, Erik. Jigna, would you like to go next?
Yes. Hi. It's great to be here. And thank you so much for inviting me. Is my voice okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I would like to share a little story from my first job. My first job, fresh out of college in engineering school, was at a steel plant in India. And I was one of the graduate engineer trainees. They used to call them the GETs, right? The graduate engineer trainees. And that was a steel plant. And they just recently had put a bunch of IT systems and, you know, automation and all of that. Very old school, very, very traditional. And there was a administration building where majority of the ladies used to work. And then the rest of the plant was all guys, like, you know, absolutely no female presence anywhere. And I was the software engineer they hired, and they assumed that I would work out of the administrative building. And I said, no, I want to work where the end users are, because I'm writing code and developing systems and configuring, you know, the ERPs and all of that. I need to understand. And they told me, but how will you work over there? There are no ladies' restrooms over there. And if you go there, you will have to come back like, you know, 2 kilometers to come back to the main administrative building to use the restroom. So I think that was the time when, you know, I'm like, I'll figure it out. And I got this amazing lady. She was the executive assistant of the senior vice president over there. And she told me, like, you know, don't worry, let's go and figure this out. You want to go? She goes literally like prints a paper in that perforated printer old time, right? This was like 1995. She puts ladies' toilet and she blocks one toilet and says, from this day onwards, this toilet is ladies. That's it. It's done. I'm sorry.
That's really awesome.
I always remember that, you know, there are always solutions. And of course, then the plant hired and the company hired more lady engineers. And we had then, you know, decent facilities and all of that. But that was a good, important first step, I thought.
Fantastic. Fantastic. What a lovely story. Thank you. And for some of us, that kind of resonates. You know, I was the first woman in sales that HCL apparently hired at that point. You know, I'm talking decades ago, right? Where they said, oh, we don't hire women in sales. And so I was like, say that to my face, right? So thank you. Thank you, Jigna. That was fantastic. Inhi, love to hear your personal experiences.
Oh, absolutely. Jigna, I love that story. That is fantastic. There's been so many amazing role models at IBM. One in particular was John Iwata. He's retired. I met him in my early 20s at IBM. He was a former senior vice president of communications and marketing, and his background, Japanese American, just incredibly articulate, is well regarded in the space. And sometimes the limitation you have is biases that you have of yourself and perspectives you have of yourself. And he really helped me think much bigger and change my perspective of the competitive bar differently. So he inspired me in a unique way, where one of the things I do is when I have the opportunity to go back regularly to Korea, I love speaking to girls that are in middle school and high school, or in young women in universities. And I share with them, I said, you know, often our world seems very local, right? And there it's less of an issue of race, it's more of an issue of gender. I live in the United States and it's both race and gender. But I tell the young women, you know, your bar isn't about competing against Korean men. You happen to be a woman, a young girl, a young lady, living in Seoul, living in South Korea, but you're competing on this planet. So I said, it's not that the Korean men aren't your bar. I said, your bar is just greater, and your potential is greater if you set your bar higher in terms of your expectation. So that's the encouragement I would have, which is your bar isn't as local as you might think. That's one of the greatest powers you have, which is your ability to choose what you think.
Great. Now, these are amazing stories from each of you. Diverting a little bit to the corporate metrics, and in these days, DEI metrics has become a mandatory metrics that every organization is talking about. While diversity metrics talk about the number of people and the count of people, I'm trying to understand how do we make the people count? Inclusion is where we think we can bring teams together, take an advantage of having a diverse team, and without inclusion, you cannot derive the real benefits. Just want to understand a perspective from each of you that what can we do at a personal level, as well as at a professional level, to foster this inclusion, both in our organizations and in our communities. Maybe I'll go with Erik first.
Yeah, sure. I would say that you say you start with yourself, and that's how I always think about it as well. A lot of people always think in programs and in processes, but it has to start with the individual. And one simple thing is to be mindful and to listen, and to practice listening, to let people feel like their voice matters. And I think that when you truly take the time to listen to someone else, they feel included. That's one very small thing, although sometimes very hard to do.
Very true, very true. It can happen in any situation, actually, be it a big or small gathering. That is important. Jigna, would you like to go next?
Yes, so I think, all of us have our own goals and targets and KPIs around inclusion and diversity metrics. And I think it's fair to say that, beyond a certain level of seniority, it gets extremely skewed, right? And I think that's a fact. And I think if you apply the cut of certain technical tracks, because I lead IT, I think that's a very evident gap as well. So some of the things that, we are doing, again, as Erik said, take it upon personally. Each and everybody has a different approach and a different style to do it. Just recruiting diverse talent is not good enough. We have to invest in growing them, having a career path, In fact, some of the things we are doing in our organization, we call it the proximity initiative to get proximate, right, with some of the diverse talent. We do, talent reviews just for the diverse talent. We go deeper in the organization. And I think I was myself like, it was 4 months since I had been in the job, in the current role. And I have a group and a team of about 200 full-time employees. And when my manager asked me, what is the diverse talent you have in the team, I realized I didn't even know their names, right? So I think I had to go dig deep into, the organization and really connect with them and make them comfortable, right? Like, I'm here if you need me. And, knowing their names, knowing their journeys, like understanding where they came from. And most importantly, how do we design a career path for them? Because I think just recruiting diverse talent is not good enough. I think having, that proximity and investment at a personal level, to build their career path is extremely important.
Great. That's a very good point, Jigna. And Kelly, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I think at a sort of professional level, something that Erik said, I think is important. So making sure that you speak up when you see certain behaviors, I think is really important, because it's quite easy to sort of sit on by and allow things to happen. And it does take an amount of courage to sort of speak up, and you don't always have to do it to make somebody feel bad in a very public setting, because they may not even understand what they've done. But, having a little chat on the side and saying, hey, I noticed that this happened, and maybe somebody could have interpreted like this, or even like I have interpreted it in this way. I think that's really important. And then I think just encouraging girls and boys of a younger age as well to really respect diverse views and opinions, and understand that we're not all the same, and that's okay. And that it's okay for, it's a norm for some people to work and some people maybe not to work. It's normal that now that we have parental leave, that it's men and women that share that equally, which was not necessarily the case in the past, and so on. And all of these small changes, I think, are really making it much more good for everybody to have their place and their say, and really encourage inclusive behavior. And I would just say, for the last point, psychological safety, I think, is really important. So making sure that you feel that you can be heard, you can speak up, and that you're not scared to sort of speak up, and trying to really make sure that you have that, whether it be in your small group or your larger group or in your overall company as well, I think is really, really important.
Perfect. That's an amazing answer, because both points, what Jigna said and Kelly, you said, many a times we ourselves don't pay attention to some of those aspects in our own meetings and gatherings. I think that is something all of us should consciously put an effort to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I've found is that when we kind of call it out, right, in a non-confrontational, more collaborative way, and say, hey, this is what I heard. Is this what you actually meant? Right. 9 times out of 10, I'd say 9.5 times out of 10, people are like, oh no, that's not what I meant, right? So I think that comes out where, and it's not like people are being intentionally biased or intentionally discriminating against one or the other, or intentionally excluding people. It's just, it just happens. And when you call it out respectfully, I think people realize it and kind of correct their ways. So, that is something that I think we've all got to be cognizant of. Thank you so much. Such insightful answers. I'd like to kind of switch gears just a little bit at this point. And, I'm going to put a Mentee link on the chat for everybody. I would encourage everyone to kind of go to this, click on the link. And, since it's International Women's Day, we're all going to have, it'd be nice if you could all pledge to break a bias. So I'm very curious to see what kind of biases people believe are really prevalent around us. It can be in your community, it can be in your organization, it can be the family level, friends, wherever. And what will you do? What kind of biases do you want to break? So I put it in the chat window. I'm going to share my screen so that we can build the word cloud, you know, and we can see how that goes. Geeta, you can see on the chat window, right? You can see the link.
Yes, I can.
Excellent. So I'm hoping everybody can as well.
And Rajani, while people are putting things into the link and checking out the chat, I'd like to make just one comment or addition on the metrics point.
Absolutely.
That is not just a good thing to do, but it also is business prudent around diversity, is that diversity is so significant that it is at the board levels of many of the companies. And when I think about Tech Mahindra and its ability to scale and serve so many customers and clients around the world, it is an important agenda because you measure what's important, but more importantly, you want to reflect diversity in your organization for this diverse set of clients you want to serve. So if you want the privilege of serving globally, every client around every industry in every part of this planet, you have to think very differently about talent, and you measure ultimately what's important. Hence why I do think it's important to have a plan, instrument it, have very clear executive targets for it, because the people that are in those senior roles have the greatest impact in both developing pipeline and placing the next generation of the top leaders.
Absolutely. You make an extremely important point. And we have our head of our SBU, Harshul Asnani, who's going to come in at the very end and, you know, give his thoughts on this important topic. And he will kind of touch upon a couple of things that we do from a Tech Mahindra standpoint to ensure that we are taking all of these things into consideration. And the nice thing about today's panel, and this, you know, and it was intentional, is that we brought practitioners in to talk about what they're doing to implement some of the policies that organizations are putting in place, right? Because like you said, this is being discussed at a board level, and people are really paying attention to the metrics around all of this. But it's one thing to drive it from HR down, but it's an entirely different thing for people on the ground, line managers and functional managers, to actually implement, take it to heart and actually implement some of these policies. So I think it needs to happen at both levels, Inhi. Thank you. Thank you. For
that. If it's okay, if we're off script a little bit, I'd like to pile on to what Inhi said, because it is critical for every hiring manager. And I appreciate the hierarchy importance as well, but to really embrace the need to have diverse people designing the products. I'm a product development person, but service, whatever. Embrace the need for that diverse mindset to serve a diverse set of customers. And you know, Microsoft's mission statement is to empower everyone. It is a massively audacious mission, everyone. So if you're going to empower everyone, then you need to have everyone represented in doing that empowerment. Otherwise, you're going to miss. And you have to just mentally believe that to a point that it becomes imperative, versus you're trying to hit a metric. It's not a metric.
Right. Absolutely. I agree with you. And Erik, if you look at the cloud that's building in front of us, I mean, I see ability, I see age, I see gender, I see, you know, and that brings us to the whole intersectionality, right? I mean, we're not one person we're not a single dimension person. And so, you know, looking at all aspects of the person and building an organization and policies to ensure that nobody feels excluded is of paramount importance. So this is a fantastic representation that I see on the screen. Let's give it another 10 seconds, folks, and then I'm going to close this because we have a lot more fun questions for the panelists, and I'm seeing a few audience questions coming in as well. So I'd love to address some of those. 10 seconds, and then we'll get going because I'm still seeing some changes, but I'm seeing experience, gender and age, ability, prejudice. There's some really nice biases that are being addressed here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, but I'm not closing the link. So if you folks really believe that,
you can keep adding to the link. Great.
keep
So
adding.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Natalie. Taking a cue from what Inhi spoke and Erik just said, why we need a diverse team and to address global clients. There's compelling evidence that diversity unlocks innovation and it drives market growth. Directly, you just stated that. So I'm just trying to understand what strategies can organization adopt to foster diversity, not just include getting the teams onboarded, but how do we create an environment where out of the box ideas were heard and also acted upon? Kelly, do you want to go first on this?
Sure. Maybe some couple of examples that we have in my company. So one is that we have this sort of concept of 20% projects, where people are allowed to spend 20% of their time doing something different. And the beauty of that is that it can be completely outside of their comfort zone or outside of their area of expertise, frankly. And that does create an environment where you get pretty diverse groups of people together. I would say another example of something that is good as well to foster innovation is this concept of cultural add versus cultural fit. And so not just looking for people who are sort of like yourself and therefore going to fit into whatever you deem to be your group of individuals, which will normally be people that look or are similar to you, but actually like really looking for maybe areas where you are missing some specific components to have a really diverse workforce, and then going out and recruiting and looking for cultural add to your team as opposed to just a cultural fit. So those are just two examples of ways that I think we can unlock a certain element of innovation.
Great, that's awesome. Inhi, would you like to add to this?
Absolutely. I think it starts with strategic intent and planned, meaning you have to document not just the existing talent you have today, but what is it that you're designing your business for in the future? So if you say, what are the areas that Tech Mahindra wants to grow in terms of new innovation for business transformation and technology, agility, and delivery, you're going to have a portion of your population that's able to reskill and adjust and be agile. You're also going to have to refresh the population and say, okay, what type of talent do we want in this next generation that are also agile and very different? I would just very candidly, my background, if I just look at pure education, would say I'm sort of unqualified for majority of the jobs I've had. I don't have a computer science degree. I don't have an MBA. I studied biology, biochemistry. I studied history. I have a law degree, but it's about how do the patterns of thinking that I have apply to business or apply to technology shifts. So my biochemistry background means I'm very comfortable in analytics and science and experimentation and having a hypothesis and moving forward. It doesn't necessarily mean I understood computer software. That's something I learned on the job, but my aptitude for learning and analytics was very applicable. The law background allowed me to go, oh, I can synthesize, 400-page case study laws and net it out to here's the black letter law and here's the synopsis on motivation, intent, and the core issue at hand. When we're talking about complex business challenges, whether it's pivoting a product, pivoting a portfolio, changing teams, deciding M&A, deciding organic investments, those are complex issues. If you can net it down into simple thoughts of business risk, that's an incredible skill. So how do you think about your talent in terms of aptitude for where the business is headed for Tech Mahindra? And I think if you do that, whether it's TechM or others, you're going to be much more forward thinking. You're also going to embrace a lot more diversity of thought. I think the best innovations actually come from people of different disciplines and fields, co-creating to solve a problem. And we're entering this unique digital hybrid world where co-creation is important. But first and foremost, you have to have a clear business strategy for the talent you have and the talent you need to take the business to the next stage.
Absolutely, I agree. Jigna, would you like to share your thoughts? Sorry,
Yes.
Erik, you're saying something?
I was just going to add one thing to Inhi's point, which was being intentional. You have to be very intentional.
Sorry.
And if you don't have the intentionality, then it's very hard to get where you want to go. So.
Absolutely. Jigna?
Yeah, so I think for us in the IT world, right, we are very motivated and driven by, building stuff, designing systems and automating stuff. And we love our algorithms and our data models and our process automations. We love all that. And I think these days, one thing which is becoming so evident is that, you don't need to put in very big efforts or very big investment to achieve big outcomes. Sometimes big results, big outcomes come with very small investment and small effort, right? And I think that type of, mindset, I think cultivating that, and I think as Inhi was saying, driving for that simplification, I think is the best thing we can do for our business today. And at least we deal, at least in our company, with a lot of years of, accumulated legacy on a lot of different, acquired businesses and all the work we do. There's way too much complexity. And I think, some very simple things like say it in a simple way. Don't always think about a solution that is only technical, right? Like it's very unnatural for technical people to think about a non-technical solution, but sometimes, a simple step of communication or additional step of, some, process handshake can solve the problem. And we don't need to, do all this complex work of building systems and things like that. Sometimes we can achieve major simplification in our systems by just challenging the status quo and asking the question why. So I think, really applying logic, reasoning, and that is where the newer people who come, from outside, I think they're incredibly important and useful because they are not hesitating to ask the questions. Why do you do it this way, right? It doesn't make any sense. And I think that is a very important aspect over there. We can't underestimate the power of asking why and driving for simplification. And as Inhi said, the ability to net it out, and say it in a most simplest way. I think I tell my team very often these days that, these days, the only thing that impresses me is simplicity, right? Everything else, okay, I've been there, done that too many times before, right? So that's just my take on that.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you, Jigna. Before I move to the next question, I wanted to pick up an audience question, which was actually pointed at Inhi. I think your comment about not having trained for the job that you're in struck a chord with a couple of people. So one of the questions that somebody's asked is, what advice do you and the rest of the panel have for people who want to switch careers, irrespective of where they are in their journey today? Any thoughts?
Yeah, great question. Great question. I can tell you at least what I've done and some of the advice I give to my mentees. So a few things. One is I start with a simple exercise of write down 4 or 5 market truths about the industry, about the future of technology, about the business. And the truths maybe happen sometime in the next 5 to 10 years kind of things, right? So, shift from petrochemicals to alternative energy sources. It could be like the bet on quantum, whatever it is. You almost need to make sure that whatever you want to pivot to, you want to pivot to something that's going to be future that you're passionate about. So first of all, don't pick just arbitrary topics. Pick topics that you're personally going to be passionate about, that you want to read on the side. You're going to have it on your on your electronic device or a book on your table. But I pick things several years in advance that I start to study behind the scenes, even when I'm doing my day job. The second thing I actually do when I think about pivoting is I find out who are some of the thought leaders and the best that do that job. And I actually proactively reach out to them. And sometimes I ask to shadow them. So earlier in my career and midpoints in my career, I would spend probably or identify 3 to 4 people throughout a calendar year that I wanted to shadow. And I would ask them, hey, if you have the opportunity on a day that makes sense, could I just follow you around for 1 or 2 days in your internal meetings, in your external meetings? Because what I wanted to understand was what were they thinking? What business problems were they working on? What decision criteria did they use to make decisions? How did they convene various constituents, whether it was internal audiences or external audiences? And so this is how I made the shift from hardware to software, from software to consulting to M&A, was partly the combination of reading forward-thinking things, right? Foresight into where the industry's headed, but then shadowing some of the top thought leaders. If they were outside of the company, I would look at them on LinkedIn or Twitter or social feeds. I would read the top analyst journals, whether it was technical or business oriented in terms of innovation journals. And then I would also participate in meetups where it made sense. So for me, it was really intentionally creating what I consider the environment to enable me to learn as fast as possible. So then I could actually ask the right questions. Oh, what opportunity would I want to work on in that space? Who would I want to work with in that space? And what work would actually be more meaningful to develop my career in that space? Right. And do it in a way where I'm not just growing vertically, because often people think about growth vertically. I actually think about career not as a ladder, but as a lattice, and a lattice of skills. So that's the way I've pivoted. Is I think about every education, every learning, every job as sort of, what have I added to my lattice of skill?
I love that. I love that. I'm going to borrow that. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Does anyone else have any comments, quick comments on that, or should we move on?
I resonated with passion, like follow your passion. We all spend way too many hours a day at work. Do something you love.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Wonderful. All right. Oh my goodness. That was lovely. Thank you so much. So moving on, we're kind of, the last 2 years we've been under some, under a shadow, right? Entered into this unnerving world of social distancing and ever-changing chaos. We saw social injustice and, at levels that we've never seen before. It's been a tough couple of years, and hopefully we're getting to the end of that unsettling time. But the clarion call for empathy and inclusivity has never been louder, right? So I'd like to kind of pivot from what we've been talking earlier to, why is leading with empathy important? And how can we break the bias that exists in organizations to ensure that EQ is given as much importance as IQ, right? Because in the past, when people were hiring, they were looking at skills, they were looking at credentials, they were looking at all of that. But EQ, both from bringing people into the organization as well as managing the people that you already have, is a very important component of leadership. So can we spend some time and kind of address this important topic? Kelly, I'm going to turn to you to get us started on this.
Sure. So I think, to your point, I think COVID this home loud and clear. So when everybody used to go to the office, I don't think we saw as much of somebody's kind of home environment and what they were dealing with, whether it be the plenty of pets that I know that I have, or children running in the background, or maybe even, people who didn't have internet when we first went home. We were facing things like that in some geographies, or people who shared accommodation and therefore they had 4 people at the same table. So trying to understand somebody's background, what they're dealing with in their personal life, and then how that impacts how they show up at work, I think has been really important. And I do hope that it stays now, that we don't all kind of forget about it over the next couple of years, because I think we really truly have sort of seen the human behind people. And I think that in doing so, people have been much more open and therefore have been more productive and been able to show that side of themselves as well to their customers. And customers have even wanted to be able to show this level of empathy themselves. And so I think it's really been a two-way street. And so I would just say encouraging people to continue to show that side of themselves, whatever that might be, whether it be taking the time out to go to the school play that you didn't used to ask for, or stopping to do some sport because you need to actually have a break, or take some time, like all of those things, and showing up that way yourself as a leader so that other people feel empowered to do it, I think is hugely important. So I'm not sure whether I totally answered your question, but I do think that EQ will continue to be absolutely imperative going forwards, even more so. And people have choices as well, not that they didn't before, but we're starting to see now that people work anywhere that maybe, the competition, frankly, for talent is so really being able to show that side for people and have that ability for flexibility is something that's going to be even more important going forwards.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. And like you said, I hope people don't forget the lessons that we learned over the past 2 years and go back to business as usual, because business as usual wasn't so great in the past. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from the last 2 years. Erik, any thoughts on this?
Sorry, my internet has been a little flaky. So we're talking about empathy, yes?
Yes,
Thank you.
That's right.
Yeah, I do have thoughts. And the thought for me is that, and something that Inhi actually said when she gave an answer about career progression and career planning, but, everybody wants meaning out of life. Meaning is where things matter. And I think to lead well, you have to appreciate what the other what's meaningful for them. And the only way to get there is to practice empathy, to actually walk in their shoes a little bit and understand what's important to them. And I think when you lead that way, you garner a much stronger bond, whether you're leading or whether it's just a team. When you know each other at an emotional level, that is when you can actually operate at the best. And so there's a business reason to do this, and there's just a human reason to do this. Right. And so that's what the importance I put on it. And the journey I've been on, at least, is how hard it is to do well, especially in a very diverse set of people. It's not difficult for me to be empathetic with people that are like me, but it's much more difficult to be empathetic with people I don't really understand. And so it's a constant journey of learning. And that's actually quite fun, but it's also a lot of hard work. Right. But it's worth it. It's worth it.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's as important to do well as it is to do good, right? So I think, so there's the IQ as well as the EQ angle there. That's equally important. Inhi, any thoughts?
A lot of thoughts on this one too. No shortage. And Rajani, I think you appreciate this, especially also given your role in the world of partnerships and ecosystem. Trust is a currency, is becoming an increasing valued currency, and it's becoming an increasing value currency in a hyper polarized public discourse. When you think about information sources and purpose. So my first premise is, businesses move at the speed of the depth of the trust that exists between two partners, whether it's two technology or consulting partners, whether it's a customer vendor type relationship, whether it's multiple customers in an industry changing and shifting standards in an industry through a consortium. The trust equation is incredibly important. I do think in this kind of digital transformation world where people are both physical and digital, like trust is not something that's easily translatable, and there's new challenges around data control and digital sovereignty and trust in clouds and cloud architecture, not to get into the business architecture pieces. That's one piece of the conversation on trust. The other piece of the conversation on empathy is, I think, when I think about my nieces and nephews, as well as the new early professionals entering the workforce, they have a higher bar for the expectations that the institutions that they're a part of in terms of their ESG positions, environmental, social, governance, government agendas. You know, in my generation and the generation before me, those were secondary to not only the reputational selections of the vendors, but the jobs and the competitive dynamics. It is very different for the students coming out of university these days. It's very different given the level of conversations that are happening. And so you would have to be pretty, I would say, in management, tone deaf if you weren't sensitive to the mix of the next generation of talent and how to attract them into your institution to evolve in a more meaningful way that's purpose-driven. And that requires a higher level of empathy. The last piece, I think, is tied to a question that was also put into the chat, which is one of the things I really struggled and equally appreciated through the Black Lives Matter movement, through the Asian hate dialogues, was it opened up a forum for senior leaders at all levels to have discussions around things like even microaggressions, microclimates, small comments. Oh, I didn't know you were American because your English wasn't so good. To wait, oh, your name's Inhi. I thought sorry, I called you a Mr. because I didn't know what gender you were. Assuming like the preferred gender would be Mr., right? Versus Miss. Because it would be more insulting if it was the other way around. But these are small microaggressions. I'm just talking about subtle things that happen every single day for everybody that adds to a dimension of the maybe mental weight and burdens that different people carry into the jobs that they have. So these are very nuanced statements, but trust in the partnerships and relationships, empathy in the next generation of higher, composition of the way you think about your workforce, as well as as you think about your own microcultures, as well as microaggressions that you kind of have to address within your environment differently.
Yeah, very well said, Inhi. Very well said. And it actually, I'm trying to segue into my next question that you have there. Social unrest that you spoke about a while back, and the injustice that has happened recently has pushed a lot of organizations to improve both inclusion and diversity within both the workforce as well as in the communities where they work. If there were any other time, this is a most better time for allyship and mentorship. I want to spend some time for all of us to talk about the importance of formal mentorship that is there in many organizations, but also allyship programs in the context of inclusion and diversity. It could be nurturing people's careers, or it could be bringing in a sense of inclusion among the teams and the belonging among the teams. Any of you can go first on that. Jigna?
Sure. So I think I have a very simple but clear demarcation between the two. For me, mentorship is important to get that in the moment coaching feedback, and hence I always, suggest that everybody picks mentors that would see you in action. So, mentoring beyond a point, if your mentor is not seeing you in action, is not as effective as it is if they see you in action and then can give you feedback, very specific, and make it very tangible, because that is extremely powerful. I've struggled through this in my career journey initially, and I kind of, it took me a while to realize that, I better should pick mentor who are, I may not like what they're saying, they'll be picky, they'll pinpoint, but man, I think that kind of, made a big impact for me. The allies or the sponsors are those that are going to give you your name when you are not in the room to get you the big job. And I think that is another thing that we all have to have. I view those as two separate roles. And I think, especially in case of, growing diverse talent and diverse career paths, I think both of them are very, very important, right? One will keep, making you better incrementally on an ongoing basis, sounding board, all of that. And the other one would pave the way, for your career path and the journey and get you the jobs, that high profile jobs will put your name, suggest your name. And I think those are extremely important. And I think if we look to grow the diverse talent within the organization, it's important that we set them up for both of those. And I have been, on the receiving end of both. And I have, played the role of a mentor and a sponsor or an ally to a lot of the talent. And I think those are very, very important. And I think, it's almost like you can't achieve in a bigger organization the needed success without those. So I think very, very important. And, that distinction is extremely clear, at least for me, between the two.
Great. Inhi or Kelly, any of you can go next.
Yeah, I love mentoring, and I think it's such, and I love being a mentee as well. I think it's such a unique experience. So I would encourage everyone to do that. I also would say it's such a unique relationship both ways. And that sometimes when you're in the position of a mentee and you're kind of wanting a mentor, just make sure also that the mentor is worthy of you, by the way, not just worthy of you because they're in a significant high titled job, but they're worthy of you because they understand all the unique superpowers you bring to the table, as well as the experiences you've yet to experience that you want to have in the future, and that they're going to be thoughtful about that in terms of your journey. I think it's a different mindset to have. The second piece too is you almost have to think about mentoring differently, and you as a mentee differently. When I was in my 20s, one of the things I did was with a cohort of other young, early career women, we actually got together and said, there was about 10 of us. We got together and said, okay, what if we just had a coffee chat the last Friday of the month? We would meet at 7:30 to 9 in the morning, have breakfast and coffee together, right? This was a coffee shop right outside of IBM's facility. And we talked to the manager of the coffee shop, and he said, yes, you can use our back room. And, and then we said, okay, what are the topics you're most interested in? What are the topics so we'd create this list. There were 10 of us. We assigned each other one topic. So you led that discussion for that month. And the topics were things like, how do you move from this division to that division within IBM? Oh, what does it mean to be a manager in this company? Okay, how do you have discussions about pay and benefits? What are they? What is the function of HR? What is the function of customer delivery? And what is the function of finance? So we were so early in our careers, but we also wanted a little bit of a safe space to ask questions that we were kind of actually quite intimidated to ask, even to a mentor, because we were still cultivating that relationship. But in this group of cohorts where we were all sort of in the same stage of figuring out life as a young adult, right? Navigating post-university life, like budgeting, debt, earning a salary and having a good time, it created this space. So what I would say is also think about your growth almost like a cohort. Don't think about your growth individually. Think about how do you learn together with other people you want to grow up together professionally over a long period of time with, and that they then become part of the network of who you support, rely on, and bidirectionally support too. So a very different mindset to mentoring, maybe.
Fantastic. So I'm going to jump in here really quickly because this conversation is exhilarating. It's great. And I think we might have messed up and dedicated too little time for this conversation. The 1 hour flew by, and I want to be respectful for your time. I know you're all really busy execs. And we do have just a couple minutes before we close. I have some wonderful questions that have come in that I was hoping I could pose to you folks, but unfortunately, we might not have time for that. And maybe we'll send out a little note to all of you with some of the questions, and you can give us your comments offline and we can share it with everybody, because I don't want those questions to go unanswered. I'm going to hand it over to my wonderful leader, Harshul Asnani. He is the head of the Strategic Business Unit, Enterprise Technologies. And he would like to kind of, talk to some of the things we talked about in the beginning, right? Why is diversity and inclusion important to us here at Tech Mahindra? What are we doing in this regard? And things like that. So not going to take any more of time. Harshul, over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rajni. And thank you, Kelly, Jigna, Inhi, and Erik, for such a wonderful and a heartwarming conversation. And for sharing your perspectives and your personal stories and your journeys and how you took a stand, how you broke some barriers, and how you lead. It was a very engaging and a very important dialogue to have. And as Rajni said, I wish we could just go on. But we need to have more of these kind of conversations and not wait for the International Women's Day to come and happen once a year to engage in these important dialogues, in my view. While enough has been said about the need to have more diversity in the workforce, I think there are still so many naysayers out there who ask, why do I need diversity? And to these naysayers, we can now say that there are statistics that support this cause. And I think it was Inhi who said this earlier. I think research shows that companies with more inclusive cultures tend to be not only more resilient, but they also trend better on all business metrics, whether it is profitability, whether it is revenue growth, capturing new markets, innovation, decision making, what have you. I think it just makes sense to invest in diversity, and as professional roles are becoming more and more gender neutral across the globe, and more companies are now realizing that there is this critical need to be gender diverse and inclusive, and hope more and more start realizing that it is important that diversity and inclusion becomes at the core of the DNA of organizations. And that even at Tech Mahindra, our endeavor is to do just that. We are what we call as intentionally diverse and globally inclusive, because we believe that if you do not intentionally include, you unintentionally exclude. And we believe that leveraging the strength of women will only strengthen our company. For us, diversity of, for that matter, every kind is important. Whether it is diversity of nationality, age, gender, thought, or abilities, for that matter. And our constant endeavor is to build a workplace which is very intentionally diverse. And I think it was Erik who said that it has to be about mindset. And one has to be just doubling down on making sure that this percolates all down the organization. And specifically at Tech Mahindra, we endeavor to have programs which are targeted at hiring and retaining women, giving them a more safe and a secure working environment, and then providing them with platforms for better learning, development, and leadership. And we also work closely with a number of organizations to promote broadly a more equitable world. But one such organization that I would like to highlight is called Untitled Chapter. It's a Mahindra Group Foundation non-profit organization that supports the education of underprivileged kids in India. And it is designed to generally support girls from low-income categories to kind of complete the first 10 years of that foundational schooling. And this organization has been around for several years now, and has impacted over close to 500,000 girls across India. So Kelly, Jigna, Inhi, and Erik, today, as a small token of appreciation, we will sponsor one girl child in each of your names under this Nani Kali program. I hope you don't mind me doing that. And the sponsorship will provide academic support as well as this annual school supplies to these to each kid, which will allow these girls to attend school with dignity. So once again, thank you so much for doing this, and thank you also to all the attendees who were on the call today. This dialogue was needed. So let us all pledge to break the bias, break the barriers, and break the glass ceiling. Thank you again so much, and back to you, Rajni.
Thank you so much, Harshal. That was lovely. And
thank you, everyone.
I'm going to lend my voice to Geeta's and Harshal's and Tik Mahindra overall and women everywhere. Thank you so much to the four of you, Kelly, Jigna, Inhi, and Erik. Really appreciate you taking time out of your really busy days and spending this hour with us talking about this really important initiative. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting the dialogue.
It's our pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Thanks to all the attendees.
Thank you so much.